The conflict between Russia and Ukraine is posing an increasing threat on a global and regional scale. Even though the war that started with the attempted invasion has cost the lives of thousands of people, the fact that the conflicts between the two countries may intensify after March and spread to other countries keeps the agenda busy. Both sides are gearing up to make their moves this spring while Ukraine is working to put the necessary infrastructure in place in order to launch an offensive in crime. The advance of the Russian army in Donetsk and Luhansk is successfully obstructed. As a result, the Russians have been seen conducting military operations in the Zizia region of Crimea, and there are currently 17 warships of the Russian Black Sea Navy stationed in the area. On the other hand, Russia is currently formulating plans to involve its ally Belarus in the. At the same time, there is the possibility that Poland and the Baltic states, along with Russian armies and armored convoys, could drag the entire world into a global war, maintain the deployment of forces to strategic points throughout Belarus. In response to this, the Ukrainian military has increased its level of vigilance along the 1084-kilometer border with Belarus since the beginning of the crisis in. Belarus has been actively contributing to Russia in an important way. It is fair to say that Russia is forcing Belarus to open a new front in the conflict that is taking place in Ukraine. The primary objective of Russia's plan is to divert military forces and attention away from counterattacks in the east and south of the country and towards Kiev. Russia launched its invasion of Belarus, which began on February 24th, using Belarus as a base of operat. During the assault on Kiev, they crossed the border with thousands of their troops and launched missiles at Ukrainian targets from air bases located in Belarus. Therefore, Belarus was already involved in the war in a roundabout way because of its assistance to Russia. Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin wants to engage them directly in conversation. However, Putin's plans for the military base that is used by the Russian Air Force are being thwarted as a result of the large-scale resistance movement that has recently taken place in Belarus and turned the country. Green Hearts from Belarus managed to bring down the Russian spy UAV while it was observing this event. Although it sent the Kremlin into a state of panic, the people of Ukraine and Belarus reacted positively to the. Although Minsk provides the Russian forces with weapons and ammunition, it has to this day not sent any of its 60,000 soldiers, the vast majority of whom were conscripts, to war, at least not under the flag of Belarus. It is also obvious that Lukashenko has refrained from directly intervening in the conflict out of fear of retaliation from the general populace and even from the armed forces, which could put his grip on power in. This time around, Ukraine has made preparations. Zelensky has been a member of a group of international observers for a significant amount of time. On the other hand, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones fly several times a day from Ukrainian positions deep within the dense forest along the 1,000-kilometer border that separates Ukraine and LAR. Ukrainian troops are stationed on both sides of the border, with Belarus keeping a watchful eye on the 650-mile stretch of swamp and forest that serves as the border in anticipation of a possible surprise attack coming from the north, a reenactment of the offensive that Russia launched against Kiev at the beginning of the conflict, which was unsuccessful. At this point, Ukrainians are not willing to take any chance. Since the summer, they have been working on fortifying their defenses and constructing new structures before the spring offensive that is anticipated by the military authorities. The Ukrainian side is focusing on completely closing the border in order to maintain control over the crossing points. This is being done by widening trenches in the forest and laying mines in the forest. The Ukrainian government began by blowing up the border bridges before moving on to mine them. In other news from Kiev this week, Ukrainian forces were responsible for the destruction of the road bridge that led to the Kremlin, a reliable ally in the defense of the city of SL. Although other border cities in the north of Ukraine had already been surrounded at one point, the courageous citizens of SL vowed to keep their homes unoccupied. This time around, SL is an extremely important border city for the defense of Kiev, especially now that the Russian invaders have regrouped in B. This city is located on the route that leads directly to Kiev from the border with Belarus and runs through the middle of the city. Because of this, it is critical to implement every safety measure that can be in the city, as well as on every border crossing and road that connects Belarus and Ukraine. The courageous citizens of the city are prepared to give their all to defend their nation in any way. People in the area are worried that Putin's forces will launch another attack like they did a year ago. There is an immediate threat present in the neighborhood at this time. The initial conflict broke out in March of the previous year, not long after Putin's invasion had begun. The city was besieged for a total of 9 days, during which time its access to food and electricity was. The kidnapping of the mayor of SL was followed by his subsequent release as thousands of residents demonstrated in the town square. The Ukrainian regime and its allies believe that Russia is plotting another attack from Belarus, which would once again place Slavo's 25,000 inhabitants on the front line. Officials from Belarus have referred to the presence of troops stationed along the border as a form of strategic deterrence. Alexander Alexander Lukashenko, the authoritarian leader of the country, is adamant that he will not send troops to Ukraine. Lukashenko of Belarus allowed Russia to use the country, which shares a border with Ukraine in the north, as a training ground in preparation for an invasion of. However, Minsk did not send troops to fight alongside Moscow's forces in Ukraine. In addition to this, it allowed Russia unrestricted access to its air bases, participated in joint exercises, and provided medical care to injured Russian soldiers on its territory. As a direct consequence of this, many Ukrainians have the impression that Belarusians are apathetic, if not actively complicit in Russia's. As a consequence of this, people all over the world realized how critical it is to always exercise caution regardless of the situation or the people involved, rather than trusting as long as there is room for error. As a result, Ukrainian commanders are exercising extreme caution as they recall how Russia and Belarus served as a launchpad at the beginning of 2022 during a press tour this week. A few miles from the head of the Army Intelligence Unit for the region stated that they constantly monitor the enemy from the ground and observe the movement of troops. He also stated that they observe the movement of troops, how many soldiers are moving, assuming they are, and in which direction are they moving. In the same way that the East is characterized by devastating artillery battles, the North is primarily characterized by quadcopter warfare. The Belarusians and Russians are always trying to keep track of the changing of the guard and locate the locations of the Ukrainian army. The Ukrainian military will occasionally become aware of enemy reconnaissance drones and will respond by firing their weapons at the aircraft. Or if an adversary drone spots the Ukrainian and follows him, the Ukrainian government will now attempt to apprehend him so he can be added to the country's Rs. They have even just recently acquired 4 of their drones through this method. Ukraine says it is conducting reconnaissance. There have not yet been any alarming signs of activity by nations. The patrol is getting stronger and there is a reinforcement section that has been added. A group that is prepared to face the adversary with honor has recently come together near the border with Belarus, according to Ukrainian government. Reprise. No one can predict how Moscow will behave in the coming months, and they believe that a heightened state of alert along the border is warranted as a result. It is said that the fortifications were constructed in order to prevent reinforcing. We can say that it is always important to be ready regardless of whether that is the case or not. Trenches dug into the ground of the forest and reinforced with planks to a depth of 5 feet are the positions of Ukrainian soldiers who are armed with machine. The first time they invaded, there were no Ukrainian weapons and no army on the border, but this time the Ukrainians are prepared. Belarus, on the other hand, issued a statement in which it issued a warning saying that a significant portion of Ukrainian troops were masked on its border, which posed a threat to Belarus's own security. It resulted in an increase in the level of security along Poland's border with Belarus and Kaliningrad, which is located along its border with Russia and Belarus. Poland has started beefing up its security measures out of an abundance of caution. This is an integral part of the strategy for defense and deterrence. In addition to this, construction of the initial border fortifications along the Kalina and Gra oblasts has already begun. It can be helpful to look back in order to understand the relationship between Poland and Russia as the country works to strengthen its. Their relationship has been fraught with difficulty and upheaval throughout the course of history, leaving a legacy of contention and max dating back centuries of skepticism. This relationship was shaped in part by a number of different factors, including regional disagreements, ideological differences, and historical GD. The ongoing territorial disputes between Russia and Poland are one of the most significant factors shaping this relationship between the two countries. Both Poland and Russia throughout history have been interested in extending their spheres of influence and territorial control, which has resulted in multiple wars between the two countries over land. This has led to a legacy of border disagreements and competing territorial, both of which continue to fuel tensions in the region and a sense of insecurity as a direct consequence of this. Historical conflicts contributed significantly to the formation of the relationship that exists between Russia and Poland. Poland has a long history of being invaded and fragmented by neighboring powers, including Russia, and has frequently been seen as the victim of aggression and expansionism. This is due to Poland's geographical location. Because of this, many Poles developed a strong sense of nationalism and mistrust toward Russia, which they viewed as an adversary from the country's past. To put it succinctly, we can say that Poland is one of the countries that believes Russia's occupation of Ukraine will not be confined to this particular aspect of the situation. Poland, which in terms of geography is the 6th largest state, is surrounded on all sides by other European countries, including Belarus, the Czech Republic, Germany, Lithuania, Russia, Slovakia, and Ukraine. Additionally, Poland has a coastline on the Baltic Sea because of its strategic location. Poland is currently in a position of regional leadership among post-Soviet countries that feel threatened by Russia, while at the same time functioning as a buffer zone between the two seas. Because of its location, Poland has been considered a troubled country throughout its entire history. This perception is largely attributable to the country's geography. As a result, Poland's geopolitical decisions, both those it has made in the past and those it will make in the future, have affected and will continue to affect the struggle for power on a global. In other words, Poland has come to the forefront as a result of its geopolitical position following the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is due to the fact that analysis has continued from the very first day of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine that the fighting will eventually spread to the east. Within this framework, the most common school of thought holds that Poland will serve as the set's initial destination during its. It has been asserted that Poland will be Russia's next objective. In fact, this assertion has been made. As a result, we are able to say that the most significant impact that the war had on Poland was an increase in the importance of its role in the security of Europe. Please ensure that you have subscribed to our channel and that you have notifications turned on so that you are notified when we upload new video. Our content has been meticulously prepared by our knowledgeable team, which is responsible for this content merely belongs to the channel for divine justice. On YouTube, we will pursue legal action against any and all channels, social media platforms, and websites that make unauthorized use of our content. We appreciate you keeping an eye on us. The most powerful forces in Ukraine have but this time the destruction they wreaked on the country literally draws proteins like crazy. An ambush was carried out by the UF battalion of the Ukrainian Special Forces against Cho's soldiers. This amazing operation has once again brought to light the brilliance of Ukraine's Kadrian, who was previously unknown. This ambush surprised the experts, and they did not know what to. Who brought shame to the Chechens because of his incompetence, said those words, and after the reactions, they will resonate in the press. All over the world, Russia has been on the agenda of Ukraine's back-to-back operations in the Ukrainian war for some time now because of Ukraine's highly developed intelligence and consistently improving military. Russia now finds itself at a grave disadvantage in comparison to. This situation is largely the result of poor management on the part of Putin and Kadyrov, but it is also influenced by the support that Ukraine receives from the West. However, the overwhelming success of this operation has once again demonstrated to the entirety of the world how far the Ukrainian side has come in the war, and why Ukraine is currently being remembered for its achievements in the UF battalion has re-emerged, and previous reports described it as being comprised of a very sizable force. The Azov battalion is an exceptionally large battalion that is entirely made up of special forces, which are distinguished by their exceptional equipment. The advantages that these soldiers on the battlefield have over many other soldiers in the Russian army are directly related to the fact that they have more expiry, as a direct response to the soldiers that Russia had mobilized and then conscripted against their will. This elite unit has continued to make historical contributions, particularly through its use of ambushes. However, the most recent ambush that they planned and executed was documented as an operation that was well outside of even their capabilities. As a direct result of this operation, people started talking about the Russians' inability to complete the army in Mamu to begin its recovery once more. The Ukrainian military, which was responsible for the construction of such a large cup, has once again demonstrated to the rest of the world that it is the superior force in Bahamut. The UF battalion was just recently given the responsibility of carrying out an operation for the organization in Bohum, which is one of the regions where the majority of military shipments are concentrated. It is widely believed that Russia is currently committing one of the most serious errors possible. By breaking the defense line in Bahamut, the Ukrainians continue to exert a dominant presence in this region. At full throttle, they responded to the fourth step by forcing Russians into conscription. The entire population of Ukraine joined forces in order to fight for their country. Putin, who has not been successful in destroying this tremendous unity and is continually sending Chechen troops towards Bataan. The fact that Ukraine paid the necessary compensation for each operation against Bahamut helped ensure that Bakhmut did not fall. However, the UF battalion began working on a project that was distinct from this one, which revealed that the primary move would be to strike at the Chechens who desired to be brought to this. Before beginning the operation, it was decided that it would be prudent to lay an ambush in the vicinity of that location. The large number of Bayer actor was utilized by the UF battalion in order to determine the route that the soldiers stationed in that region have traversed through. As soon as this detection was made, the UF battalion was mobilized for a major operation close to They had learned the date of the next cargo shipment in that region, which is where a large number of ammunition and supply convoys passed through. After arriving in good order, the UF battalion immediately immediately began making preparations. The first step for the supply of troops, which was not as well protected as the convoy carrying ammunition and provisions, was to decide where to settle on both sides of because they were aware that the route would be scanned by unmanned aerial vehicles operated by the Russian army one day in advance. The UF battalion was aware that they had just taken a very significant step at this point in the battle. They began to wait for the convoy while dressed in camouflage that blended in with the surroundings of where they were. One-on-one information obtained from agents serving within the Russian army suggests that a group of approximately 300 Soledad residents departed on that day. Because of this, the UF battalion had sufficient time to position Sea Lion on the ground. A large number of rocket launchers were set up in the mountains and flag officers were stationed in a nearby position to wait. The Azov battalion was prepared for the operation in every way. The Chechen battalion started moving closer to the area they were in. The Azov battalion moved quickly to detonate the C-force. After hearing the sounds off in the distance, when it came up directly in front of them, two of the armored vehicles that were in the front line exploded, and their C-force also went up in flames. This event was responsible for the mobilization of Chechen troops. Some of the Chechens who were unable to determine precisely where the attacks were being carried out were deployed on both sides of the conflict. However, this was not sufficient to provide the Azov battalion with the necessary compensation. Rocket launchers were the first line of defense taken up by the Azure battalion. Something has come to their attention that they had been unaware of. Up until this point, explosives were hidden inside one of the railroad cars used by the Russian. After the discovery of this flag, those who carried it were dispatched to fight against the Chechens who lacked the necessary air defense systems. The introduction of bioreactors has made material assaults an even more complicated endeavor than they already were. By exploiting this in the most advantageous way, the UF battalion was able to catch Russia off guard in spite of the fact that a significant number of Chechen soldiers had already been. The UF battalion ordered the surviving Chechen soldiers to surrender. Those Chechens who were coerced into surrendering were subsequently made prisoners and relocated to parts of the conflict zone where fighting was less intense. After hearing this, Putin went completely insane from the pain. Almost immediately after that, a significantly different atmosphere could be felt throughout the churches. After Kudry was also made aware of the situ, Chechens were prisoners, relatives, and those detained in Chechnya were seething with rage withdrawal. The people started organizing demonstrations shortly after they learned that Kady Ra was to blame for the failed troop shipments. According to Kady Ra, the reaction to this caused great repercussions all over the world because of the words that Kady had said. If you continue to make these demonstrations, I will take you to visit your family, who are also detained here. Although this rhetoric was intended to be threatening to the people, it actually caused a further increase in reactions, which resulted in the mobilization of the National Guard, which is considered to be his personal army. It is common knowledge that this group of approximately 340,000 people was formed for the sole purpose of putting an end to the demonstrations that were taking place in Chechnya on the other. In light of the most recent information concerning the war, one of their other responsibilities is to determine which service members do not wish to take part in the conflict, and to administer the appropriate discipline to them. These punishments are viewed as war crimes committed by Putin, and the number of crimes that Putin is believed to have committed is a direct result of this perception. In the event that he is removed from his position of power, the retired Forge is very much aware. Putin immediately started doing everything that was in his power to ensure that he would not fall from power. On the other hand, these flawed policies have started to bring about very large problems. On the other hand, on the Ukrainian front, the people are engaged in a great deal of activity working together in harmony because Russia is unable to do what Ukraine has done. These activities are one of the most important reasons why Ukraine has created a line of resistance that cannot be. The Ukraine started making repeated attacks on the side that was in the lead in the war. Putin, on the other hand, is handling this situation in a difficult manner, attempting to keep the people under his control solely through the use of fear. The fact that this endeavor does not have the support of a large number of people serves to remind us once more that repressive governments do not have a long lifespan according to the findings of the operations that the Russian army has planned face a very significant challenge due to the presence of Russian soldiers. Due to the presence of this barrier, the Ukraine is able to carry out all of its operations with relative ease, whereas Russia prepares adequately whenever it intends to carry out an operation. But as a result, it comes in second place to the Ukraine. Germany made an appearance on Ukrainian Luhansk was the location of a significant operation that was mobilized and carried out by Leopard on on Tuesday. Russia was placed in a figurative and literal bind by the Ukrainian army. Russia has no strikes left on Ukrainian soil. Because of this brilliant operation, the Ukraine was able to destroy a massive head. Response to this information, the Kremlin issued warning signal. Number 1. The decisions that were made after that exposed Russia's true colors. During the waning stages of the war between Russia and Ukraine, Russia was hemmed in by its enemies in certain regions. The region surrounding Luhansk is the one that holds the most significance from a military point of. Since this region was located so close to Russia when the occupation first started, it was very simple to take control of it. In light of these new developments, the thought crossed his mind that he would come to dominate the entire viewpoint. But none of the subsequent developers have turned out the way Putin had hoped they would. As a result of this most recent operation, putting our software into place and dealing that enormous blow in lieu, he has lost control of yet another region that he has held since the beginning of the occupation. Russia has been doing nothing but retreating for a long time. While some analysts interpret this as a massive preparation to fight its invasion of Ukraine, some analysts interpret this as a massive preparation to fight Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In fact, this is the time when the Russian army is at its most. Putin is prevented from taking any of the actions he desires as a direct result of the careful work done by Ukrainian intelligence. The Ukrainian military is continually planning and preparing for new operations. However, during this very last operation, the vital significance of the aid was brought to the attention of people all over the world. The primary driver behind Russia's current predicament is the fact that it is impossible to predict what action will be taken by Ukraine, is causing an internal crisis that is only getting worse within the Russian military. The Russian military is in serious trouble as a result of Ukraine's commanding positions. As a result, Russia will have to seize control of approximately 70% of its every piece of equipment that was abandoned after the battle was captured by the Ukrainian army and used against the invading forces. The hopelessness of the Russian armed forces has a significant impact on the policies that Putin pursues. However, this most recent operation has left him in the most hopeless situation he has ever been in during his entire rule. To begin, the Ukrainian military got to work on regaining command of the Luhansk region as quickly as a result of Putin's realization of this, significant ammunition and military reinforcements have been sent to that region. However, Russia is unable to respond to any of the tanks that Ukraine has bowed down to. When the Ukrainian army became aware of this, they immediately took steps to organize a very large operation using Leopard. The Ukrainian army has decided to organize this operation as St. Barak Stars in order to gather intelligence in that region. The goal of this operation was to blow up the Russian military headquarters in Luhansk, which is of great importance to the Ukrainian army. The Russian military headquarters is located in Luhansk. Ukraine is at this point. Barak Tours made a very astute move by taking advantage of the fact that they had been sent primarily to badmouth Sold. The Russian military initially began deploying soldiers to these regions. Putin assembled all of his forces in the region of Sadar because he was under the impression that the Ukrainian army was going to conduct an operation there. But this was a completely different tale. The region of Luhansk was the source of the majority of Ukraine's intelligence, which is one of the most unbelievable turns up. Soldiers from Ukraine came to the conclusion that a command post located in that region did not have sufficient air defense systems and therefore would not be able to respond to a potential attack by Ukrainian forces. As a direct result of this, Ukraine immediately began to mobilize for the operation. The tanks of the Ukrainian army were sent in the direction of this area so that they could unleash their destructive. But at this stage, the tanks were the single most important factor in determining how successfully the operation would be carried out. Next to that, where the barracks were, which are widely regarded as an essential component of each and every Ukrainian operation. The directors were so effective that the Ukraine was in the lead in many facets of the conflict. The operation was initiated by the deployment of Ukrainian special forces was done in order to protect the attacks from potential dangers. It was anticipated that this would deal a significant blow to Russia's already diminishing military power in this region. In the beginning, Ukraine dispatched directors to the headquarters. The bioreactors drew the attention of the soldiers stationed at the headquarters, which prompted the soldiers stationed in that region to fire back at the attack. After the Ukrainian army came to the realization that they were unable to give a very powerful response, they brought out their Part 2s and began firing towards the outlying quarters. The outlying quarters were completely cut off as a result of the attacks that were carried out by the Ukrainian special forces. When the Russian soldiers realized this, they immediately began looking for a way out of their predicament. the Ukrainian military had already deployed. Despite the fact that they were still using radios, the Russian soldiers were driven to desperation as a result, which increased their reluctance to surrender the headquarters. However, Ukraine did not cease its assault on the headquarters and continued to use its devastating firepower. Following their retreat to the close zone, the He's opened fire on the headquarters in rapid succession. Their target was the command. As they tried to make their way into the command center, the Russian soldiers were helpless and could not stop running. They were helpless and had no other option but to capitulate. Russia's defeat in Syria, where it had left so little ammunition, was a defeat that will go down as one of the most significant in historical records. In response to the repeated demands that they surrender, the Russian soldiers ultimately made the decision to be taken prisoner by the Ukrainian special forces successfully overrun the Russian stronghold in the region, seizing Russian prisoners. Along the way, the outlying quarters, which were of crucial significance to the Russian army, were brought down as a result of the efforts of the Ukraine vets. Putin was infuriated by this circumstance because he continued to lose such crucial points. One after the recent events have begun to dispel the notion that he will unquestionably prevail in the conflict that is taking place in Ukraine. As soon as this was brought to the attention of the press, the Kremlin immediately issued a red alert in order to prevent any further ground loss. However, there was yet another issue that prompted the red alert to be issued in the Kremlin. Recently, a significant amount of warm weather was provided to the Ukrainian armed forces. Even though Putin is aware of this fact, the situation has drastically changed as a result of the newest weapons that Ukraine has obtained. Putin's anxiety was exacerbated by the fact that the United States provided Ukraine with long-range Patriot missiles while simultaneously leaving the door open for FS. Pushing wasted no time in initiating a nuclear missile threat against the United. Then, despite his inability to foresee how the war would ultimately play out, he took a step in Moscow that sent shockwaves throughout the entire world. Putin, whose power had been shaken as a result of the lack of support he received from the people during the war as a result of being pushed into a corner at this point, knowing that a small minority of Putin's supporters would defect to the opposition in the event that Moscow was attacked by your brain, he set up air defense systems throughout the entirety of Moscow. This has demonstrated to the entirety of the world that Putin is becoming increasingly terrified as he is extremely concerned about the war penetrating Russian territory. If something like this takes place, it will be impossible for Putin to maintain his position as leader during the mobilization of the. Putin has suffered significant casualties. As a response to these casualties, Putin issued a second call to arms and made a commitment to provide financial assistance to the families of the individuals whom he had enlisted in the military. But at this point, we noticed two issues that needed to be addressed. Even if Putin had intended to keep his promise to provide financial support, he never did. The state of Russia's economy currently prevents it from being a viable option. If things carry on in this manner, Russia will be unable to take any action because of the confusion that has arisen. Economists estimate that Russia has approximately 7 months left before it enters a state of financial collapse. The fact that such a definitive date can be established demonstrates to us that this budget deficit cannot be. But there are other issues that are more serious than the budget deficit. The Russian army, or OSV, is comprised of soldiers from many different regions, such as Luhansk and its headquarters, which has a significant amount of military equipment and ammunition, are worth their weight in gold to Ukraine because the Ukraine was unable to locate these supplies of ammunition when the conflict first started. In other words, Russia's attempt to invade Ukraine was unsuccess, but the result was that Ukraine gained the necessary military power to challenge Russia. It was the citizens of Russia who footed the bill for the ammunition and weapons used by the Ukrainian side of this conflict, as well as the ammunition and weapons used by the Russian side. This once again brings up very significant issues. The severe lack of material resources being experienced by both the military and the general populace has reached an intolerable level. According to the analysts, this situation is on the road to recovery. A shift in political control is required before they can become a reality.